She's in the military. Dad snorted loud enough for the whole table to hear. Probably just a secretary in uniform. Mom chuckled into her glass of wine. Uncle James gave a knowing nod like he'd heard this line before and agreed wholeheartedly. I didn't say a word. I just kept slicing into the roast beef like I hadn't been gutted on the inside. You'd think after 19 years in uniform, 4 deployments, and 3 commendations for battlefield leadership, my own father might call me something more than a glorified typist. But in this house, I was still just the little girl who played soldier in the backyard and would come to her senses eventually. They never saw me. They never wanted to. It was Thanksgiving dinner, and the table was set. Like always, Mom's candles flickering beside her cranberry sauce, no one touched Dad at the head of the table like some retired king and me. In the one chair they always saved the guest seat. Never felt more like a stranger in my own childhood home. Uncle James was back from Florida for the weekend. The moment he walked in, it was handshakes for Dad and a stiff side hug for me. He used to babysit me. Now he looked at my dress uniform like I'd worn a Halloween costume to church. So what exactly do you do in the Army, sweetheart? He asked with syrup in his voice. Before I could respond, Dad grunted, probably pushing papers somewhere. You know how these things are. It's all about diversity now. Gotta have the ladies filling quotas. That was the moment I nearly stood up and walked out. But I didn't, because silence was my shield. Because the uniform taught me that dignity doesn't shout, it endures. So I sat, ate, swallowed the burn with mashed potatoes. They changed the subject to football. I drifted away in my mind, remembering the heat of Kabul, the desert wind ripping through camo, the sound of incoming fire, and the weight of men looking to me for orders. They had no idea. That night, I lay on the old twin bed in my childhood room. Posters from high school still clung to the wall back when I thought medals and ranks would change how they saw me. My phone buzzed with texts from my XO back at Fort Bragg. Something about an upcoming review panel, maybe a transfer. I told her I'd call back tomorrow. I just needed one night to breathe. Just one night where I didn't have to prove I belonged. Where I didn't have to carry my worth like armor. But instead I lay there, eyes open, heart sore. And then, the phone rang. Not a text. A call. From the Pentagon. Colonel Anderson, the voice said. I sat up so fast the bed creaked beneath me. Yes, speaking. This is General Wallace, Joint Special Operations Command. I won't keep you long. Your name just came out of the final recommendation list for command of the 82nd Airborne. Official announcement pending approval, but off the record, you've earned it. My throat clenched. Sir, thank you. You led men into hell and brought them back alive, Amelia. It's time you lead the rest from the front. He hung up. I sat there in the dark phone, still warm against my palm, breath caught between disbelief and something else. Something heavier. They'd never believe it. They'd never understand. But command of the 82nd, that wasn't just a promotion. It was legacy. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I remembered every step that led here, every door slammed in my face, every doubt, every whisper behind my back. They said I'd wash out at West Point. I didn't. They said I'd never survive Ranger School. I did. They said I couldn't lead men in combat. Tell that to the dozen who made it home because I stood my ground outside Fallujah in 2007. They don't give you command of the 82nd for being nice on paper. They give it to you because you've bled for it. Because you've carried your wounded on your shoulders. Because you've written letters to mothers after midnight. Because when the chopper door opens and the wind hits your face, your eyes don't blink. They lock forward. But nobody at that table would have seen that version of me. Not the man who looked me in the eye at dinner and called me a secretary. Not the mother who told her church friends I was just doing some administrative work. Not the uncle who used to say, it's not a real job if it doesn't involve a briefcase. To them, medals were shiny toys and deployments were extended vacations. They didn't know about the night I ordered a 19-year-old private to move through gunfire because it was our only shot, and he made it. They didn't know I pulled my platoon sergeant's lifeless body out of a burning Humvee and held his wedding ring in my hand until I could give it to his wife. They didn't know any of that, because I never told them. because deep down, I stopped needing their permission to be who I am. Still, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see me this time. So the next evening, I dressed for dinner again, nothing formal, just a black blouse, jeans, hair tied back. We sat around the same table, candles flickering. Mom was talking about a neighbor's daughter who'd made partner at a firm in D.C. "She's doing real well for herself," Mom said with pride, glancing sideways at me. Dad grunted in approval. I took a sip of water. Let the silence build. "I got a call last night," I said. 3 heads turned toward me. From General Wallace. I paused, watching Dad's fork stop midair. "They're nominating me to take command of the 82nd Airborne." Silence. Real silence. Like the kind you hear just before a storm hits. Dad dropped his fork. It clattered against the porcelain plate like a gunshot in a chapel. Mom's lips parted, but nothing came out. Uncle James blinked slowly, like his brain was buffering. I didn't move. Didn't smirk. Didn't even blink. I just looked at my father. And for the first time in my life, he looked away. The next morning, I woke early. The house was still. No coffee brewing, no chairs scraping, just the hum of silence stretching through the old wooden beams. I laced up my boots and stepped outside into the November chill, the kind of cold that makes your breath hang heavy like smoke from a tired soul. Out here in the flat backyards of rural Kentucky, no one knew or cared what insignia sat on your shoulder. Just cornfields, rusting fences, and the same gravel road I used to jog down as a teenager, desperate to escape. I started running, 1 foot in front of the other, the same rhythm I'd used across war zones and training fields. I ran to silence the anger, to keep the pain from bubbling to the surface, to remind myself that control, real control, comes in the moments when you say nothing, but choose everything. When I got back to the house, Dad was already in the kitchen. He stood by the window, coffee mug in hand, staring out like he expected the world to explain something to him. He didn't say good morning, didn't ask how my run was, just glanced up when I walked in, then looked back down at his mug. I poured my own coffee and stood beside him. A quiet standoff, no eye contact. Then he spoke. "You serious about that command?" His voice was low, cautious. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a sip and let the silence do the work. Finally, I said, "Yes, it's official next week." He nodded, slowly, like he wasn't sure what to do with that. "I didn't know they'd give that kind of job to someone like you." He said it without malice, but the sting was still there. "Someone like me?" I asked. He swallowed. "A woman." I didn't explode, didn't roll my eyes, didn't offer a lecture. Just nodded. "I know," I said. "You've always seen me as a little girl in boots playing soldier." He looked ashamed for a flicker of a second, then masked it behind a shrug. "It's just unexpected." I set my mug down. "What did you expect, Dad? That I'd spend 20 years sitting behind a desk typing memos. That's what you told your friends, right? That your daughter was in admin support." His jaw tightened. "It was easier that way," he said. "People don't understand. Women in charge. It makes some folks uncomfortable." "Then, let them be uncomfortable," I replied, my voice like steel. "I earned every stripe. I've led men who would die for me, and some already have." He didn't respond. Didn't have to. I could see it in his eyes. The world he thought he understood had shifted, and he didn't know how to stand in it anymore. That night it hit the news. The Pentagon leaked the shortlist. My name was at the top. Colonel Amelia Anderson to be nominated as next commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division. It spread fast. CNN, Military Times, even the local paper picked it up. My phone buzzed every 10 minutes with texts from former platoon members, commanders, even cadets from West Point. Somewhere in that buzz was validation. But I didn't chase it. Instead, I sat in the guest bedroom, scrolling through the headlines until one voice cut through everything. "Dad," from the living room. "Turn on the TV." I walked out, and there it was. My face in uniform, standing at attention. The anchor spoke like it was history. Because it was. Dad sat motionless on the couch. His hand still held the remote frozen midair like he'd forgotten it was there. The camera zoomed in on my photo. Colonel Anderson has served multiple tours, led combat operations in 3 different theaters, and is the first woman in history to be recommended for command of the 82nd Airborne. The news anchor smiled. My father didn't. Not in anger. Not in pride. He was just quiet. For once in his life, the man who always had something to say had nothing. And that was enough for me. Dinner was quiet. Too quiet. No jokes from Uncle James. No passive-aggressive comments from Mom about my career. Just the clink of silverware against ceramic and the low hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Dad chewed slowly. Mom kept her eyes on her plate. I could feel their discomfort swirling like smoke around the table. That morning's headlines had done more than surprise them. It had shattered the image they'd spent years believing in. The secretary in uniform was now the first female officer ever nominated to command one of the Army's most storied combat units. No PR stunt. No quota. Just earned respect wrapped in bars, blood, and steel. I waited. Not out of cruelty, but because they had never once asked what I actually did. And now, they were choking on the truth they had ignored. I cut into my chicken, let the sound scrape the silence. Then I spoke. I leave for D.C. in 3 days. Mom looked up for the briefing and the ceremony. She nodded, lips tight. Uncle James tried to salvage the mood. Well, that's big. Really big. It's history, I said plainly, but I'll need to relocate. They'll probably station me out of Fort Liberty once it's formalized. Dad shifted in his chair. I glanced over, expecting sarcasm. But what came next hit like a bullet to the chest. Didn't think they let women run combat units, he said. No edge, no sneer, just confusion, like a child realizing the world isn't built the way he was told. I met his eyes. They let people lead, Dad, if they've earned it. He flinched, just a little, but I saw it. Mom exhaled. We're proud of you, honey. Of course we are. I gave her a tight smile. Thanks. Uncle James muttered something about changing times, but no one followed up. And then I said it softly, directly. I didn't come here for congratulations. All eyes turned toward me. I came because I wanted you to know who I really am, before the rest of the world does. Dad set his fork down. Not gently. It dropped. Metal clattered against ceramic. He stared at me, stunned. He looked smaller somehow, not in height, but in presence. For so many years, his voice dominated every room. Now, he seemed to shrink under the weight of what he refused to see. You think I don't respect what you've done? He asked, almost defensively. I shrugged. I think you don't understand it, and that's fine, but I won't live for your approval. He said nothing. The room stayed frozen in that silence, until finally he stood and walked away, plate untouched. I heard his boots thud down the hallway. The door to his study creaked open, then closed. Mom leaned in. He's just surprised. I nodded. So was I, when he dismissed 2 decades of service with a joke. She winced. Uncle James cleared his throat. Let me help you with the dishes. I waved him off. No need. I've handled worse. And I had. Enemy fire. Fallen comrades. Corpses zipped into bags while I kept my voice steady for the rest of the unit. Compared to that, one man's wounded pride. Nothing but background noise. That night, I stood on the back porch. Stars blinked above the tree line. The air smelled like cut hay and cold soil. Behind me, my childhood house loomed, same bricks, same porch swing, same tired walls. But everything had changed. Not for them. For me. Because I didn't need their permission anymore. I never did. And that truth, it didn't burn. It freed me. The Pentagon hall was colder than I remembered. Not in temperature, but in presence. There's a certain stillness in buildings like this. Like history watches from the walls. I stood at the side of the stage behind the curtain, already in full dress uniform. Silver eagle insignia glinting at my collar. The row of ribbons on my chest felt heavier than usual, not in weight, but in memory. Each one was a ghost. A name. A story I never got to tell my parents. And now they'd hear all of them on live TV. A press aide gave me the countdown. 2 minutes, Colonel. I nodded, checked my sleeves, straightened my posture. My hands didn't shake. They never did. But my breath did hitch for just a second. Behind me, the Secretary of the Army offered a soft smile. You ready to make history? I already did, sir, I replied. This is just the paperwork. He chuckled. Damn right. The curtain parted. The lights hit like a spotlight on a battlefield. The flashbulbs exploded from the back of the room. Reporters shifted in their seats. Live feeds started rolling across news networks worldwide. I stepped onto the stage. A woman in a crisp uniform chin, high boots, steady heart, quiet. Not a secretary. Not an afterthought. A commander. The secretary stepped up first, reading the official nomination, listing my deployments, my citations, my record. Colonel Amelia Anderson will be the first woman nominated to command the 82nd Airborne Division in its 100-year history. Applause erupted. Reporters leaned forward, pens dancing. I waited until the noise faded, then stepped to the microphone. I was told once I began that women in the military are often seen but rarely heard, that we're best kept at desks in the background pushing paper. A pause. I've pushed a lot of things in my career, but never paper. I've pushed through ambushes through nights when I thought none of us would make it home, through decisions that haunt me still. Cameras flashed. I kept going. My father once said I'd come to my senses and settle down, that this life was just a phase. A uniform doesn't make a soldier, he said. I looked straight into the cameras. But service does. Back home, I imagined Dad sitting in his recliner, the remote in one hand, disbelief in the other. I imagined Mom frozen in her kitchen, a dish rag hanging limp in her fingers. I didn't say their names. Didn't need to. They knew. The press asked questions. I answered with facts, strategy, vision, confidence. But when one reporter asked, "What would you say to little girls watching this today?" I paused. I let the silence linger, then said, "You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand. And when you stand long enough, the world notices." Later that evening, I boarded the flight back to Fort Bragg. My phone buzzed midair. A message from my cousin back home. "Your parents watched the whole thing. Your dad didn't say a word the rest of the day." I stared at the screen. Didn't smile. Didn't scoff. Just leaned my head back and closed my eyes. Some battles are won without bullets. Some victories don't need parades. Sometimes silence is the salute. I came back home 3 weeks later. Not because I had to, because I wanted to see if the air had changed. The driveway still had that loose gravel patch near the mailbox. The same wind chimes clanged unevenly on the porch, bent slightly from the last winter storm. Nothing on the outside had shifted, but something inside that house had. Dad met me at the door. Didn't say hi. Didn't hug me. Just nodded once. "Colonel." It slipped out so naturally, like he'd said it 100 times. But we both knew he never had. I didn't correct him. Didn't call him out. I just nodded back and said, "Dad." We stood there in silence, and for the first time in our lives, it wasn't awkward. It was respectful, uneasy but clean, like two people who'd finally stopped pretending to be something else. Inside, Mom was setting the table again. Sunday roast just like before. But this time, she didn't ask if I had time off or whether I'd thought about going back to school for a real career. She simply pulled out my chair and said, "I hope you're hungry." The three of us sat in silence for a while. No one asked about the press conference. No one brought up the headlines. But I caught them glancing subtly at the stripes on my shoulder, like they finally understood what they meant. I didn't need their questions. I didn't need their applause. I'd already stood in front of thousands of soldiers and reporters. This was the battlefield I'd finally conquered. After dinner, Dad asked if I'd come sit with him on the back porch. That was new. He used to disappear into his study with a glass of whiskey and Fox News humming in the background. Tonight he held 2 beers, one for him, one for me. We sat side by side on the swing. The sky was pink and tired. Cicadas buzzed like background noise from my childhood. After a long pause, he said I didn't know. I know. Another pause. You should have told me. I took a slow sip. I did, just not with words. He stared off toward the horizon. You're not what I expected you'd become. That's okay, I said. I didn't become this for you. He blinked, then nodded. Not in dismissal, in understanding. There was no apology, no teary reconciliation, no dramatic hug. Just silence. But it wasn't the same silence from before. It wasn't dismissal. It wasn't contempt. It was reverence. And for once, that was enough. Later that night, I walked through the house before bed, fingered the edges of old photo frames, family portraits where I stood in the back in dress uniform, awkward, smile frozen. I passed my high school diploma, still hung in the hallway. Under it, a small shadow box I'd given them years ago, containing my first rank insignia and a photo from my first tour. It had been collecting dust, but someone had cleaned it. The glass was spotless, and beneath it, a new plaque had been added. Call Amelia Anderson, 82nd Airborne. I stood there for a long time. No tears, no swell of pride, just quiet peace. Sometimes redemption doesn't come in the form of confessions or apologies. Sometimes it's just a clean frame, a new nameplate, and a silence that finally means respect. I returned to Fort Bragg the following week. My new office was in the command wing, wide windows, polished oak desk, an American flag standing sharp in the corner. The walls were still bare, waiting for me to fill them. But I didn't rush to decorate, because the weight of the position wasn't in portraits or medals. It was in what I carried every day in silence, in scars, in the names I never forgot. I hung one item first, a single photo. Me and my squad in Helmand, covered in dirt, laughing like we weren't surrounded by landmines. Private Keegan had drawn a mustache on his gas mask. Sergeant Velasquez was flashing a peace sign behind me. Half the people in that picture never made it home. I hung that frame behind my desk just to the left. I wanted it where I could see it every day, because before they called me Colonel, before the press conferences and history books, I was theirs. And they were mine. A knock came on the door. My XO poked her head in. Ma'am, Commanding General wants a briefing at 1400. I nodded. Copy that. Tell him I'll bring my notes. She started to leave, then paused. Ma'am? Yes. I saw the news coverage. Your parents must be really proud. I smiled gently. They're learning. That night, alone in the office, I stared out the window as the sun dipped behind the trees. I thought about every time I was told I didn't belong. Every moment I bit my tongue instead of screaming. Every promotion earned without a single family member present. I used to think silence was punishment. Now I realize it was power. A woman who refuses to explain herself. That's someone the world can't control. Somewhere back home, I imagined Dad walking past the hallway where my name hung. Maybe he paused for a second. Maybe he didn't. But either way, he saw it now. Not just the uniform, the weight behind it. To every woman out there who's been told to stay in her lane, to smile more, to play nice. Don't shout. Don't beg. Don't explain. Just serve. Just stand. Just lead. Because one day, they'll drop their fork too. And that sound, that's what justice feels like. If this story moved you, if you've ever worn a uniform or loved someone who did share it, honor their silence. Remember their strength. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, stay with us. Subscribe. We're not done telling the truth.